Good afternoon and welcome to, I guess, what may be the last session of the day. I like the last thing between you and the party. How many Bon Jovi fans here? All right.
Too many.
There's my generation. All right, so we're going to talk about just this exciting rock and roll stuff today, which is software-defined security. You've heard a lot this week about the software-defined data center, software-defined networking. This is the session that talks about how we're taking those same principles on security challenges that our customers have. I'm going to introduce the topic, and we have two additional speakers with me, Dolly, who is the VMware's Chief Security Officer, and Merritte Stidston, who is the McKesson Data Center Transformation Architect. So the two of them will actually then talk about how they're using these concepts in their environments, and it's actually a really exciting session. This is a second time we're doing this. The first time we also had a full room, really exciting time. So without much ado, let me get started. So first of all, some things that you see in this presentation may be future-looking things, and things may change. The sort of the typical disclaimer. Okay, so to begin with, the reason why we're here is because we have virtualized compute. We have done a great job vMotioning workloads around. We have VMs on demand. The challenge that we have today is that those VMs cannot be secure and compliant on demand. And our customers are challenged with making that transition. As the VMs are moving into the cloud, as we're virtualizing more and more, we are bound by the rigid architectures that are bound by network topologies and VLANs and software agents. There's a challenge of those, that the security teams have a challenge essentially looking into the virtual infrastructure and getting visibility, getting control. And then certainly there's some technologies like antivirus agents, which then have their own sets of challenges with I/O spikes and things we call antivirus storms. And then finally, as we move workloads into the cloud, the policies are bound to the networking and the security technologies that are found in that physical data center in a fairly static and rigid way. And when a workload moves from one site to another, when it moves from the private cloud to the public cloud or the hybrid cloud, the policy typically does not follow because those security controls were bound to the site. So all of the capabilities that VMware is talking about, the agility, the efficiency, the mobility, seem to break when we care about security and compliance. So again, this conversation may be with security teams. The VI architects talk about, I want to get to 80% P2V. They talk about, I want to go to vCloud. And of course, the challenge is there is that the security teams ask me to be risk neutral, to remain compliant. And in many cases, when we talk about elasticity, typically the conversation turns into over-provisioning some of those appliances for the potential capacity. And that over-provisioning and host sprawl from air gaps seem to be another challenge. So a number of reasons why software-defined security is something that we think as a rethink that's required. In terms of specific use cases, when do we run into this? We run into this with virtual desktops. We see it a lot when we talk about the private cloud, the hybrid cloud, disaster recovery scenarios. Anyone who's working on a data center consolidation project or building out new sites, we've seen a lot of requests to rethink how we are doing this today. How do we become more operationally efficient? How do we not have to spend 3 or 4 hours provisioning a new app, just making sure that that next firewall rule is in the right order of precedence? So with that, the software-defined security in the software-defined data center begins by virtualizing security, protecting the VMs with logical elastic trust zones where policies bound to the workloads and not to the underlying topologies. We do this with constructs like virtual data centers and orgs and VApps, which become objects that we protect. And we, of course, extend that and connect it securely to public and hybrid clouds. When you consider what all this actually brings to the table, the basic instrumentation and implementation and the binding of security controls to workloads is sort of the first step. We can actually go even beyond that. When security practitioners look at their policies, they're considering how to enable a security process. It is not just technology, it's also people and process. And for instance, in a PCI environment, which I guess this slide somewhat models, we're looking at protecting the customer data. And the customer data environment is actually a set of VMs or a set of machines in scope, some of which may have sensitive data. And we may not necessarily know where they are. So we can, for instance, help you discover sensitive data. We can then discover applications that are connecting to that virtual machine to automatically discover the CDE. We can apply trust zones. We can discover also who's connecting to those machines and providing some audit trails, connecting that with the vShield app as an example for the firewall rules, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, having the layer 2 isolation, which is actually the boundary of the PCI scope. Using that same security group or the policy context, sharing that context with configuration management tools like our own, like our partners, and then being able to do things like this in a repeatable fashion where I can automatically protect the machines, I can audit them, I can report on it, and by providing that level of integration both from VMware solutions to software-defined capabilities as well as partners, and automating the policy at that higher logical level. Now, like I said, we don't do this alone. We do this with partners. The partner ecosystem has been growing tremendously. We have announced some of these integrations 2-3 years ago, beginning with our VMsafe partners, adding to it the endpoint security partners like Trend Micro, growing that this year and last to a number of other partners. And we, in fact, just announced the brand new VMware Ready for Networking and Security program, which is going to be live mid-next year. We're recruiting partners into it right now and really scale out the design partners that we brought to the table until now. And what this means is that we will enable you to logically protect and in a very mobile fashion protect workloads using not just VMware technologies but also these partner technologies. And the number of partners that we're going to scale out is going to be dramatically increased, from 12, 15 to potentially 40, 50 very quickly. And this is a major breakthrough for us. So the objective of this, again, is to go beyond that physical infrastructure, the boundaries that we're currently tied to, the VLANs, the air gaps, as many customers talk about, and to abstract and up-level that security policy and the capabilities, and in the process go from a very rigid to a much more policy-driven environment, one which is going to persist with the virtual machines and the workloads as they move from site to site and as they move from private cloud to public cloud or hybrid cloud. So with that, I wanted to just give you a quick summary of what we do, what the software-defined security stands for, but then you will now see it through the lens of our CSO, what are some of the things that VMware has been doing, and then from Merritte, and he will talk about how at McKesson they're applying some of these capabilities as well. So with that, Justin.
Thanks, Dean. Thank you. It's very kind. So much like Dean said, I think why am I here? So I've been doing security for a little bit of, a little over a decade, and I've spent some time in some different industries in software and media, and spent a little bit of time in a healthcare-related industry, if you want to refer to it that way. But before that, I was a network engineer, which makes some of the things that VMware has done over the last couple of months very, very interesting to me. But why am I at VMware today? I think that it's a pretty exciting time to be at VMware and in this industry at this time. I think there's a massive shift that's occurring within the industry, and VMware is certainly a very big player at it. I see the cloud security challenge as well as virtualization as being the big one at the moment. There have been a number of challenges over the last decade or so around network and intrusion and malware and social engineering and application security and various other things. But at the moment, the big focus, as far as I'm concerned, is what do we do with virtualization on the cloud? Do we make the move? If we do, what do we move? And so I think security is a very, very big part of that conversation. Here's an example of, well, is that an effective security control? I think in my career I've certainly made security decisions that may not have quite panned out the way I expected them to. Security controls are supposed to achieve something. They're supposed to either give us some confidence around the control we desire, or at least change some user behavior. And clearly user behavior isn't quite hitting the mark with that particular thing. But one of the things that I try and remember as I see slides like this is somebody somewhere paid money for that. A CFO, an accountant, a manager somewhere signed a PO and actually paid for that security barrier, and it didn't quite hit the mark. So I try and remember that any of the purchases that I make, or any decisions that get made within my organization, actually the rubber actually meets the road and not the grass, for example. So when I joined VMware a little under a year ago, there were a number of data center security myths, if you like, that came along with my arrival. And in my first couple of months, I was involved in a lot of conversations where we talked about these things. I need the same security model for physical and virtual. The virtualization layer can't be trusted. Physical solutions offer better performance. The traditional approaches are the ones that we know and love, and we're comfortable with them. And then you lose all control in the cloud. Well, I guess I was schooled in a number of ways, but I began to sort of see the light, if you like, and realize that the traditional methods are the ones that had to sort of shift. And I had to take my line of thinking where it came to security and change it somewhat so that I could live in this new world, live in this developing industry, if you like. So the same security model for physical and virtual, this isn't an all or nothing decision. At VMware with our products, we give you the choice. You can choose to leverage virtualization to gain cost efficiencies and administrative efficiencies. You can choose to manage those resources in exactly the same way as you do your physical ones today. So you don't actually have to make that jump until you're comfortable in doing it. So I think that flexibility is something that we offer, and something that's valuable, certainly to me. The virtualization layer can't be trusted. This is another one that I think the traditional methods have been around securing hosts. You know, my data's on that server, I need to protect that server. Or my data's in that database, I need to protect that database, that box, that appliance, or whatever it is. I think that if you focus on the data itself and not the host that it's actually sitting on, or the bare metal that's the disk it's sitting on, or the bare metal that you think it's residing upon. If you focus on the data itself, then virtualization affords you a very powerful weapon that you can have in your defensive arsenal, and you can actually specifically manage who gets access to what. That data then lives in objects, which is a great word that Dean just used, but you can then focus on those objects and secure those as opposed to the hosts that you think the data may be residing on. The data tends to replicate, as you all know, so where you think your data is not always where it actually is. So if your controls are based on those hosts, they don't necessarily move when the data moves. In the virtualized world, it can. Physical solutions offer better performance. Physical solutions, you know, as we grow, they've sort of sprawled, if you like, and we've ended up with this massive raised floor scape that we have, which is very expensive to manage. And in the do more with less sort of a mode that we continue to be in at the moment, the physical solutions are hamstrung by their very nature. You just can't grow quickly. You can't continue to grow exponentially because data centers just aren't big enough, and there just simply isn't enough power. So virtualization becomes, you know, one of the few choices you have that you can make an intelligent choice and move forward and build a logical environment that makes sense. Again, the traditional approaches, the reason why they have been proven and safe, and we sort of go back to that time and time again, but the economics are the thing that's really sort of failing this particular myth, if you like. CIOs are tasking CISOs and others to build secure solutions for the IT services that they're providing, and without the CapEx, OpEx sort of poison cocktail that they don't want to actually drink. So with them being too expensive, we're searching for better and better methods to be able to achieve it. And of course, virtualization offers that affordability, if you like, if I can use that word. So the traditional approaches just don't add up anymore, simply from a financial standpoint. And then you lose all control in the cloud. Again, if you focus on the data, you can actually deploy more and more granular controls right next to your data, as opposed to, we've all implemented with defense in depth, but as opposed to simply having that defense in depth and having layers of security, you can actually deploy security measures right next to your data. So in some ways, it can give you when flexibility is demanded by developers and engineers and so on, it can give you the confidence to allow a certain amount of traffic to ride through your network. You can block the things and filter the things that you know you don't want in your environment, but you can let other traffic ride with the confidence that you've got some security controls that are more granular, that are sitting right next to the very things that you want to protect. So getting away from the tactile, bare metal focus on a host sort of an approach. Approach. A little bit about VMware. On any given week, there can be anywhere from 150,000 to 750,000 VMs at VMware. So this is the environment that I'm required to protect. Provisioning and deprovisioning happens at tremendous speed and at large scales. We have also 5,000 software engineers and developers spread around the globe that require a tremendous amount of access and that have also a requirement to be able to collaborate very, very healthily across time zones with the rest of their colleagues, whether they happen to work day or night. Those 5,000 engineers are working on, at any moment in time, more than 300 projects within IT and R&D. So to put it mildly, it's a very open environment, and that's required from a collaboration standpoint because VMware does develop at a tremendous pace. But access cannot be a barrier to innovation. It just simply can't be. So the challenge is a large, dynamic, elastic environment, but you still have to have security in place to be able to protect your assets. The reality check when it comes to that environment is VMware has experienced exponential growth as a company. As a result, number of employees and the infrastructure itself has grown exponentially. We've made a tremendous number of acquisitions over the last number of years. And what I mean by no meaningful structure on which to base a security infrastructure is when you grow at that pace and when you acquire at that pace, your physical environment, your data centers, your office networks, and so on, that you must connect, isn't done in as thoughtful a way as you might imagine. So we've probably, everyone in the room, acquired somebody where their environment wasn't quite up to the standards of your own. So there's no structure there to be able to layer on security, so it tends to be sort of, onesie, twosie implementation depending on what that acquisition is and what the type of product is and who works there and various other things. So a couple of questions. Air-gapped networks are secure, so how do I achieve that at a massive scale? You simply can't. Can I re-architect the network? No. I've gotten to do that once in my career, but no, it's typically just simply not an option, so you've got to get a little bit flexible. The old tricks just simply don't work. So we need a rethink, and Dean used the word rethink earlier on. I need a security model because I'm facing actual threats that are in my data centers, but I'm not alone. I have access to some of the best minds in the industry. I have access to great products, very, very good partners that work very, very closely to us, and with our products I can actually make some of my own. So you don't have to take the cookie cutter security solutions. You can actually get creative and make your own using our own products. Bottom line, I need something that's repeatable, scalable, and efficient, because that's the way VMware works. It has to be repeatable, it has to be efficient, and it has to scale. As from 150,000 to 750,000 VMs in a week, that is immense scale. And if the security doesn't move along with everything else, then it gets left behind, and that we can't have that. So it's basically my own software-defined security. So much of what's happened over the last few years have been a lot of the threats that have developed and that we've all had to deal with have been malware-based. So I wanted to sort of provide a scenario around the anatomy of a malware attack and give you a little bit of insight into how you could use some of our technologies to be able to respond. After all, such a big piece of information security is the incident response piece, and the only factor within that formula that really works is how fast can you respond, because everything happens at such a massive pace. So a hacker sends in a phishing email, internal user clicks on it, goes out to a compromised site, after they clicked on the email, the malware gets downloaded. Internal user goes out to a C2 site. What do you want me to do? C2 sites send back commands. Go compromise other hosts within the environment and start querying around to see what's interesting. Basically, the anatomy of a malware attack. Vanilla. It happens everywhere, millions of times a day. So what can you do? The things you have to do: block, filter, isolate, patch, reconfigure, upgrade, examine, monitor. These are the steps you've got to go through if you're going to do a comprehensive and fundamental response to that, and you need to do it quickly. So the damn it symbols there are the places where you've really got to take action. So Security Ops Center kicks in. To block malware, because not a lot of it uses IP addresses, you use DNS to do a lot of blocking. So you can get creative about how you can do that. So you don't simply have to use only VMware tools to respond to your security issues. But also the little orange things there, which I'll get into in a minute, are security VMs. So we have taken our own products and built different types of security VMs that we can deploy within minutes to any environment around the globe. So if we get an alert that there's something going on anywhere in the world, we can be sitting right there in that network, right beside that bad host, ready to neutralize that threat and understand what's going on. So I'll get into that a little bit more. And obviously, we can't get past patching, antivirus, and account lockdowns and network lockdowns and so on. So 7 quick examples on how we've used our own products to achieve security goals since my arrival. The first 2 are actually tackled together, but I stole Dean's graphic from earlier on. But we created what we refer to as VDI, as a sysadmin view environment. So we want to protect the VMs from each other. We force our sysadmins to authenticate, to manage the environment, and provide a predictable administrative environment. So the administrator has to 2-factor auth into a VDI environment where we protect each and every one of those hosts from each other. And from there, the animation catches up, they have a secure channel into the IT infrastructure to be able to manage it. All of the IT people at VMware are required to follow this path to be able to administer any of their devices. So it gives you a predictable avenue to be able to see all of your admin traffic and to be able to manage against it. We also used vShield Edge to be able to, within this environment, do session isolation and active port blocking and monitoring. So up until we deployed this, admins were able to administer whatever they wanted from wherever they wanted. So a significant security goal achieved there. Create bubbles to protect critical services. One of the things that we had at VMware, and I've seen it very many places in my career, is that some of the critical services are available to everyone and everything. Everyone was able to do a DNS lookup. As I referred to earlier on, the vast majority of malware it leverages DNS to be able to get out. If you manage DNS correctly, then it's neutralized from being able to get out and be able to do bad things to your environment. So one of the things we did was we created bubbles and moved those services into the bubble, and then required all of our users to be able to hit that environment to be able to do their DNS lookups. Can this be done in a physical world and in different ways? Absolutely. But this was the way that we decided to do it, and this is amazingly portable. If we need more horsepower in there, we just create more VMs and put them in the bubble. If we need to move it around, we can move it around really easily. But it's one way of corralling what I refer to as a critical service. I think I refer to DNS as a utility. It's like power, water, DNS. It just works. We don't even think about it anymore, most of us. Wi-Fi is almost there. It'll be a utility soon. But you can choose to do this with other services that are critical to your organization. But this was one that we wanted to leverage. Separate networks by function and sensitivity. We have a network separation initiative at VMware to separate our corporate and engineering environments. One of the pain points we hear from our development environment is you do a quarterly lockdown at the end of every quarter so that you can protect your critical systems. Why should we slow down our development so that you can do that? And they've got a really good point. So why should we, for 8 weeks a year, slow our development down just so we can close the quarter and wrap the books up and do all that stuff? So In a similar way, using vShield, we've been able to set up these environments and move all the corporate systems into one and all the engineering systems into each other. Obviously, there are some shared services that are firewalled off from each other. And then using vShield to be able to allow access to application front ends. And then, of course, the administrative environment is available on the back end to be able to get in there. Again, using that two-factor auth sysadmin view environment. So you create bubbles by functional unit, and there's no limit to that, and I'll get into that a little bit further in a minute. The apps are available to users via the front end or the administrators via the back end. Each app is created is protected by its own bubble. Lots of times, the business systems are managed by others, not the IT team. This happens at practically everywhere. So you can actually have somewhat of a federated or decentralized model and allow those people access to be able to manage their apps without breaking the model. But the bottom line is the information security team gets central visibility into everything that happens in all those environments. So no one gets to leave the reservation. How to create them, you're probably very familiar with this, but simply you're not bound to the hardware. You're not bound to physical hosts in any way, shape, or form. Two ESXi environments there, but the bubbles can be striped across them and firewalled from each other. So it's just an idea of a trust zone, or the term I use is bubble, and I'm trying to make that stick. So further isolation can occur. In this example is a finance and an HR environment. This is something we're actively working on at the moment. And so you can, when you've got these known predictable environments, you can very, very easily and very quickly manage what should get access to what and what shouldn't get access to what. Maybe finance and HR are not the greatest example here, but another one I'll give you is why should the facilities person in Singapore need access to a Perforce environment, for example. You can make those decisions very, very easy and affect those security controls very easily when you follow a model like this. Leverage VCM for patching. So VMware Configuration Manager, or VCM, is something that we decided to use internally. We carried out phase one of a project quite recently, where we're currently managing over 6,000 hosts in our environment for patching. So as we all know, us security people know and love, we love patching, right? But it has to be done. It has to be done in a repeatable, efficient manner. So our pilot was incredibly successful, so we're rolling this out, and we want to get it to the point where all of our patch management is being managed by VCM. Rising tide lifts all boats is a reference to if good patches are applied in an efficient way, compliance gets better, stability gets better, availability gets better, and even security gets better. Even though all the patches that we're asked to apply today are called security patches, whether they are or not is up for debate, but when we see security patch, we tend to apply. So the end justifies the means, I suppose. But you can check a lot of boxes by making sure that your patching is pretty efficient. Replicate prod environments to allow for assessments. I heard this in my first couple of weeks at VMware. When I arrived, I wanted to assess everything and find out what was what. And so we went to the team, and the environment it wasn't actually completely virtualized. It was around half of it. And I got this quote, and I've heard it before. You can't pen test it. It'll probably go down. And if it goes down, we won't make any money, and you'll be in trouble. So the deal that I brokered with them was, all right, I'll take your environment and I'll P2V it to somewhere safe, and we'll assess that. And then we'll create a report. And I'll agree to do that if you'll treat that report with the respect you would if it was in production. And it wasn't a difficult decision. They understood immediately, and it actually worked out really, really well. So this is in case you ever hear that in your career. You probably have already, but this was one way that as soon as I heard, I went, all right, what am I going to do? And then I went, wait, I work at VMware. We have this stuff available to us. So just a method that I thought was interesting and actually worked really well. So I referred earlier on to incident response, which has become more and more important, and obviously the speed of the response is the most important thing. So it's inevitable that malware is going to get into your environment at some point. The only choices I have are not VMware tools. I'm not here to tell you that VMware has all of the solutions to all of your problems, and we're done. Just sign on the dotted line and use all of our tools, and you'll be secure. We do have our own products, and we're leveraging them more and more, and they're getting better and better every day. A lot of them A lot of the products that are being released this week have more and more rich features that are really impressive as far as I'm concerned. We have tons and tons of partners that we're leveraging and working very, very closely with so that they can virtualize their technology or snap in or plug into our environment. And then the security VM, which I referred to earlier on, is pretty simple stuff. But you can build you can have one VM or many different types of them depending on what the problem is you're trying to solve or the incident you have on hand. But the general one that we have is a hardened Linux box with forensics tools and security tools and a built-in IDS IPS engine. So if we ever have something, our security operations center can get one of those in that environment very, very quickly to lock it down and neutralize the threat. So we've some security everywhere, just like everybody else, but you're able to rapidly deploy security right next to your threat. So your security VMs fly in and hopefully neutralize your malware. And generally, we leave them in place. We usually don't remove any of them. We leave them there. It's sort of a scene of the crime thing. So what it gets down to is this software-defined security is flexibility and it's incredibly agile. We're able to respond very, very quickly. We're able to be effective in what we deploy where. And we can be thoughtful about our environment and make sure that we're protecting our data. And so this, again, comes back to in the physical world, none of this stuff is possible. The security VM thing in particular is one that's sort of near and dear. If you run into one of these threats or something and it's part of an acquisition, you don't have any security in that environment, but you have something you've got to deal with. Typically, you call up a partner and order an appliance, and they'll ship it to you, and you'll configure it, and you'll put it in a box, and you'll ship it over there. And that could be done in 4 or 5 days. But there's about 12 countries in the world that'll make it sit in customs for 3 weeks. And are you willing to wait that long to deal with your malware threat? Or even are you willing to wait 3 days or 5 days? I'm not. So in the physical world, you just simply can't react this quickly. If you don't already have a foothold in that environment, you're waiting days. And senior executives are asking you what you're doing about it, and you're giving them the tracking number. And I've been in that position in the past, and I don't like it. I don't want to be in that position in the future. So security shouldn't stifle creativity, innovation, or speed. That's the bottom line for me. It's kind of my mantra at VMware. And I think with software-defined security, it can't get any more flexible or any more agile than that. So with that, having provided some examples, I'd like to introduce Merritte Stidston, who's going to talk about some things McKesson have done. Merritte.
Thank you, Justin. No worries. Hello, I love that one slide where he showed the world with all the security threats, and I noticed that Canada and Finland are really suspicious characters up there, but Africa is okay. So I really like that. Is my mic on? I'm going to kind of step this way. So everything that Justin just said, a lot of people are like, wow, that's great, but, it's just a slide deck, and is anybody really doing this? Well, what happened is we started climbing this mountain all by ourselves a couple years ago at McKesson, and we're trying to figure this out. We enlisted the help of the information security risk management team, our networking partners inside the company, and our external partners. So we started climbing up there, and then somewhere along the way, about a year ago, maybe just a little bit over that, we started working with Dean and his team and found out we're going the same way. And we were actually building this stuff in our facility with almost $100,000 worth of gear, all the software, professional services, actually trying to implement this. And we had surprisingly close views as to how this world was going to play out. So I'll walk through what we're doing with inside of our facility. And if anyone wants to, please feel free to stop me during the middle of the presentation. So why am I doing this? What are the needs of us having this done? Well, we've got teams within the company that have to have access to personal data, whether it's our HR systems, so people that can write software for the HR, travel, performance reviews. We've got teams that are writing software for hospital applications, so they need to get a dump of hospital data, and so they can take that data in, de-identify it, and then provide it back out to the applications team so they can work with anonymized data. We had to meet our management requirements. Within that, the company needed to feel that, yes, we are doing everything we can to take and protect this data, that we have done our due diligence throughout this pathway. And then the technical challenge. We started off with very simple premises in this, that it was going to be as easy to deploy a totally non-secure VM as it would the most secure VM that Justin Dolly just got done talking about. That every security wrapper you could put around it, it's going to be just as easy. So once you've created the architecture, if it takes you 3 minutes to deploy that VM, it's going to take you 3 minutes in a highly secure environment. You will not notice a difference. That the ease of use for our customers will be no experience, the experience will be no different in either one of them. We talked about this as being a car, as if it had, both came off of BMW's line, and one has all the security and safety features it's supposed to, and the other one doesn't. If you looked at those, they would look identically the same, and you'd only notice the problem when you had an accident. You'd only notice the problem once you've been breached. But what would it cost you then to add all those security features to that car after the fact, before you're allowed to actually drive it on the road? It's going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars to add those things in. So we wanted to make sure that we could do this at the inception point when these things were created. We had to reuse all of our existing templates and intellectual property. We've got large application templates that mirror 800-bed hospitals. We have imaging systems that we use for x-rays, MRIs, those. And they're constructed in such a way that if we have to rebuild those every time just to move it into this other environment, it's going to cost us tens of thousands of hours to rebuild all those templates for a separate environment. It was the expense of doing it, and the operational expense is much worse than it is the actual cost of buying the software. So changing all of these things. So we took all of those things, pulled it together, and when it came to this last one that says, what were the hurdles to overcome? Cross-collaboration, when we thought about it, it has taken us longer. It's taken us, I'm going to say, about 12 months longer to have achieved this than if I would have just went off there and done it myself. Now, there's a caveat to that point. If we'd have gone off and done it ourselves, we were going to have to rework this whole entire thing as it became more and more into the enterprise, and we started working with the information and security risk management teams. We would have spent actually more time in the long run than we spent up front. The other thing, too, is that they're totally bought into the system because they've been participants throughout this entire system, this effort. They've also been able to provide us critical information that we're not security people by nature. We handle the infrastructure. So they provided critical knowledge to us, and that was invaluable to us being able to put this into our environment. Vendor participation, absolutely core for every one of you. They've worked right there next to us. I was in just a presentation prior to this one. And one of the things is that you get all the leading information from your vendors on what the most current rules and regulations are that you have to meet within these environments and how to use their tools to achieve that. That's critical. So having that there in place. And then developing a clear plan with very clear objectives. That was the other thing. So those are the things that we put forward. And again, we tried to focus on the needs of our customers. Not my needs, not the needs of my team, not even the needs of the ISRM team. They had a need where they had to use this data in order to drive the business. One of the other slides that was up here that Justin had was about innovation, and we've got to do these things, related to innovation, or it has to be for driving the business. Well, oftentimes when people are telling you that, they're also not the people holding the security bag if this thing goes bad. So they hold none of the risk, yet they want you to take all of the chances. So now we're able to take and implement some of these things within here. So we sat down and scribbled this out on a board. So all of you have done something probably similar to this. It's not technically totally accurate. It was really to identify all the different control points, all the different systems we had to look at. Just something that we could say, where do we start? What are we going to look at? So we pulled together this slide and put it there and said, okay, this is generally how our world looks. So if you looked at it as a Visio, this is a little bit cleaned up, but you can now start seeing all of the complexity and being able to address some of the components. Do we want to go to our PCI DMZ? What are we going to do with our virtual center? How are we going to handle all this interconnection with the antivirus and the SEIM systems that we've got to have in place? So, as I said before, the business problems that I have a fundamental belief in myself is that security is my problem, and it's everybody's problem. And we can't look at it as being something that the other guy. We all suffer the same risks as those bad people that are out there that want to take and attack our network. They want to attack yours, and anywhere they're successful, they're able to then use that to monetize other attacks. So we have to make it our personal belief that this is something that we're all responsible for. The business units have asked for it. Now, they didn't come up and say, I want an SEIM system. They never said that. But what they do is they ask and they say, I want a way to know that only the people that are accessing the systems can do that. Do you know of a tool that'll do that? Well, absolutely. Well, let's use our technology speak, and it's an SEIM system. They don't ask for antivirus. They just want to make sure that they're not going to get malware. How do we take and then build this infrastructure as security first? And that was the other premise that we had that was key and cornerstone. So the two ones that we did all this by were, one, that VMs have to be deployed highly secure as easily as a non-secure one, and it's going to take in that we're going to build this as a security first platform. So security is our goal starting all the way to the end, and we built it to that. So then when we looked at the technical challenge, who were we going to follow? We had nobody out there in front of us that could help us lead the way. We had multiple tools that we had to look at to integrate. We're saying, you know, I've never done this before. When we started integrating the CA control minder for virtual environments, in which we get from CA, and there's high trust in there. We didn't know how to do that. We hadn't seen that tool before. We'd never worked with it. How do we integrate that with our TXT technology from Intel? How do we then take and connect it upstream from that into the virtual center? How are we going to connect all these pieces back together? How do we develop a common framework and so that it can not only be used within my data center, but it's going to be able to be used in our production data center? And how do we future-proof this and so that if in the future we decide we don't want to go with this AV vendor, we want to go to another AV vendor, that we can just swap that out as a Lego block and put the next piece in. So we thought about all those things, and we actually put the effort in way up front saying, how are we going to do some of these things? And then we decoupled everything so that we have fluidity. So the idea is that we can flow these VMs anywhere across our farm or out of the data center, so that the security actually is bound to the virtual applications instead of being bound to the infrastructure. And that is the real mind leap that we did. It's really that now these things are embedded into the virtual applications themselves. So Justin's slides were the really nice, pretty, how did VMware, these are the things. This is how it looks when you actually kind of implement it. We have our developers and support personnel need to be able to get in and interact with this sensitive data. You know, use whatever sensitive data. It's PHI, credit cards, it's health information, it's your HR systems data. Well, what they do is those users come into our View environment, Bastion host, they connect into that, they're able to be isolated fully within inside of that environment, and we wrap them with vShield app. We then have our TXT technology, and that's one of the core pieces. This actually started with a paper from Intel on trusted compute pools, and we'd been working with Intel for a couple years on how can we bind our software to the hypervisor. Before VMware's product was there, we were working with VMware, and it was in Flow. So we were early on in this process. So with the help of Intel, with the help of VMware, and with the help of HITRUST, we were able to really start saying, how can we now take this processor, which if you can't trust your silicon, who can you trust? Well, we sourced that through HP, Dell, IBM, Cisco, the major vendors. They make sure that we get the best we can have inside of this environment. So we deploy our environments on top of it. Again, wrap those in virtual data centers. So now we've got our multi-tenancy here, and we can isolate each one of those groups off. I use the analogy of you got a group of people that are working on the exact same banking app, but maybe that banking app supports Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Citibank. So you've got all your support people in the same room. You want them to be able to share knowledge and experience and help each other, but you don't want them to be able to see the data from another one of the customers that you're supporting. Well, through this method, you then take and drop that in there, all their apps, and then you further isolate them, and there you see Justin's bubbles. So Justin's bubbles now are exactly what you're seeing inside of this environment, where we've got them fully containerized. Not only do we containerize our VDI instances, but also the entire application around it, and we can control that communications pathway. So what does this look when we start looking at the teams? Now I'm going to call out something here that, remember, the group that we work for is we support the development environments. Normally, you would not have vShield, Edge, App, and Endpoint in our team's sphere of influence, and you would not have the high trust component there. There are two things. One, this is an initial pilot. We've got our phase 1 that we've actually implemented, and so the tools are so new that we didn't even know all of them. Second thing is that our security teams definitely don't know them, and they don't know all of the security aspects of what goes into this environment. So we're going to be helping train them up, and eventually those two tools will move out of our environment and go up into the security admin role, and we'll no longer have access to those systems. So then we consume all the items in the red as black box. We didn't have to reinvent any of those. Those are already within the corporate structure. They're within the information and security management team. I now consume every one of those as a black box. We just point it up into their cloud, their stack, and we're able to consume them readily within inside of our environment. Last, Active Directory. That's where all the roles, users go, and that drives the systems for who can get into what. They connect into our trusted AD to high trust, and then all of that information, and I could have drawn arrows to every other thing inside the environment, but those arrows then feed that back up into our SEIM system, and then the other systems are there in place to protect us. So this is really the important slide for all of you that are going to be going down this pathway. It helps give you a framework by which you can take and start building this yourselves in your own environments. The secure network zone, that's a DMZ by any other name. It's just an internal DMZ. The irony is that the networking team still made us put it between two firewalls. So we seeded, it was a small request on their part. We have all of our traffic segmented out. The other thing too here that I want to point out for full disclosure, and it's a trick, a sleight of hand, the VMware View 5.1 broker, we actually have a View environment inside of there, because today there's not a seamless way to utilize the benefits of View within vCloud Director and enjoy all those benefits. It is coming. We've been working with VMware on that. We've had a few meetings with them and expressed our sincere desire that we can have our View environment as its own standalone, and I don't have to take and do that in this world. But it works effectively, and it's a great middle ground until the products evolve a little bit better. And we're very proud of what we've accomplished. So, reduction in time. Left these a little bit ambiguous because I also didn't want to get up here and throw a whole bunch of numbers, because this is phase 1 and we're implementing it right now. But I can tell you, we're looking at days or weeks from building individual one-offs to now this is going to be down into the minutes, where the security is totally wrapped around the vApp and no longer wrapped around the hardware. Ease of use, again, paramount for us to deliver, that our end users could not, be delayed. They've got business to perform, they've got projects, and if we're holding those down, that's revenue generation that we're stopping. So we've got to make sure that we can make this easy for them. And they have a legitimate need to have access to this type of data. Reuse of all of our existing processes, reduce risk, lower cost of compliance and reporting. OpEx here is a great one. The CapEx is phenomenal. When you start looking at what we don't have to buy on that side, that is tremendous. The number of ports that we have to handle, and then upgrading it over time, we can move systems in and out as we need to upgrade them. Accelerating what the business has to do, improve customer satisfaction, they are all very eager. And we started off with the premise that what were the business needs for this, not what were the security, and then we backfilled that with our partners with inside the company and our partners outside the company. The newfound sense of collaboration, I have to tell you, Mike Wilson's here, he's our CISO. I am so terribly grateful to that team for all the hard work that they've put in, and that is from the bottom of my heart. It takes a lot of work to get this done. This is not trivial, and if you're starting off on your own, it's tougher. These are good, proven methods. I can tell you this stuff is working together. It's there, it's real. We're already on phase 2. So we've got all of our requirements up for phase 2. How are we going to take and implement that? And a better overall solution. We came up with a much better solution if we had tried to do this ourselves. And I'm glad that we've found willing partners that said, I know other people that want to do it. I sat next to the CIO of Lufthansa yesterday, and he was telling me about his woes of what they were trying to do there. And I said, hey, you know what? We've got a solution for that. We did the same thing, and so we spent an hour at lunch. Everybody else had left, and we spent an hour there going over what we're doing and why. And so it's not just us, it's everyone. So I encourage you guys to really look at this. And lastly, being tied to this physical infrastructure, and that's what those wires are. They are tying you down, they're wrapping you in there, they're keeping you ever present to that physical world. Well, what we need to do is get to the totally mobile bubbles, as Jason has suggested and as we have built. So thank you very much. I'd like to say we'll be happy to take any questions for you. We've got Dean Koza here. He's the director over the security products, and Justin Dolly, the CISO of VMware. So you've got the people. I've got some of my team here that can answer questions as well. So if anyone's got anything, I'd be happy to assist.